GPT-5 puts prompting on hard mode, and I want to make this the most accessible, easy to use prompting guide for you when you're playing with GPT-5. Why am I doing it now? Weeks after GPT-5 came out? Quite simply because it took me some time to figure out how I wanted to share what I was learning about the model. This is a tricky model to prompt, and I compare it to a speedboat with a really big rudder. At the end of the day, this model wants to go fast and it wants to be steered really, really hard. That big rudder, like it wants to be steered really hard. But most people, our prompts are not in a place where we can effectively steer that model. My aim is to not only show you how to solve that problem, but enable you to be human, right? To be a little bit lazy, to write the way you write and still get good results from GPT-5. It's taken me some time to figure it out, but I'm excited to show you. Let's dive in right at the top with a quick look at a meta prompt. A meta prompt is a prompt that makes your prompts better. Now, if that gives you a headache, don't worry. I'm going to give you a bunch of these in the Substack article that you can use. Also going to give you a quick one now that you can look at, understand how it works, understand why it works, and get right on the road to improving your own experience with GPT-5 to steering the model in ways that are easy for you. So with that in mind, an easy get started prompt with a specific real example. Let's dive in. Okay. I chose help me prepare for tomorrow's meeting as an example of a real life prompt that I have seen people type in, that I have typed in sometimes myself. I'm not always perfect at prompting. I gave it to ChatGPT-5. I did not give it to ChatGPT-5 thinking or any of the other options, just to ChatGPT-5. It responded with all of this. Thought for 12 seconds and spit back a rapid prep guide. It doesn't even know what the meeting's about. It spit out a specific agenda for specific meetings. It doesn't know the meeting is 30 minutes. I didn't tell it that. It's making it up. It spit out a drop-in template. All of this is useless to me. And then it asks for two questions, right? What kind of meeting is it? Who's in the room? And what outcome do you want? I guess that's three questions. I answered all three. And it comes back with a pitch. This time, you notice it's now taken 2 tries. It's coming back with a pitch. It's coming back with a stakeholder leverage map, a steering question for the room, objections, encounters, run of show, and a next step script. It's okay. It's not nearly as clear as it needs to be. It's making big assumptions about what these stakeholders want that aren't clear. It's deciding that it wants a sense of the context and the data, and it's making it up, right? Industry peers use automation to see 20 to 40% lift. I didn't tell it that. It just decided to make that up and call it a fact, which it isn't a fact. It assumes that everything supports this pitch. It doesn't even know what the pitch is. In other words, by giving it generic information, with GPT-5, the power on that speedboat is so high, you're just inviting it to make stuff up. You're just inviting it to fabricate stuff. And this is not a particularly useful tool. And I think it exemplifies some of the frustration people feel, because whether or not you're prompting with just 1 line or 2 or 3 lines, it is easy to get this incredibly detailed, incredibly lengthy response that at the end of the day isn't super useful. Now, let's go to a different approach. Let's see if we can use a meta prompt to improve things. Okay, here we are. You're looking at a meta prompt. Transform my request into a structured brief and then execute it. First, interpret what I'm actually asking for. What type of output would help me? What expertise would be relevant? What format would be useful? What level of detail? I'm asking the model to verbalize assumptions that I can correct if need be. And that's really important because it shapes the rest of the response and whether or not it's useful. Second part, then restructure and execute as a specific role, and you should infer appropriate expertise, a specific objective. Please make my vague request more specific. An approach, choose the methodology that fits the objective you've come up with, and an output. Basically, what we're saying is take this tiny phrase, I use the exact same phrase, help me prepare for tomorrow's meeting, and expand it in a way that makes the prompt useful, and then run it. So here's what the model said. First, it gave me the structured brief. Now, it assumes I'm me, right? I talk to ChatGPT all the time. Based on its memory of you, it will say something different here. It will then take the objective, and prepare a concrete, actionable prep plan, right? And it talks about what it's going to prepare. And already, I think this is more useful. It wants to give me a sharp grasp of the context, anticipated objections, talking points, etc. It's going to use this approach to clarify the unknowns, to structure preparation, to surface 2 to 3 likely points. Do you see that? It's already realizing it needs to ask questions, but it's realizing it needs to ask questions in the context of this meta prompt I've given it. And so the questions are more specific and they're more useful because they're tied into the objective that it's inferring. And then it's giving me the output, a meeting prep sheet with a context recap, a message, questions to ask. This is a more useful output already as a framework. And so then it gives me the executed output and it puts blanks in. It doesn't make stuff up, which is useful because I don't want it to make stuff up. And finally, it asks 3 questions that are more useful and more specific. What kind of meeting is this? Who's in the room and what's the decision? So I give it the answer. It's a client pitch for a marketing automation project. These are the people in the room. I need to get approval to move to the proposal phase. And I'd like a comprehensive template that I can fill in plus some draft talking points. It then comes back with a meeting prep sheet that's really filled in. Now, does it still make some stuff up? It does infer a little bit here. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but it gives me much, much more actionable, much closer meeting draft preparation notes than I got with the other answer without the meta prompt. It gives me points I want to emphasize. To be honest, it's correct. Revenue impact is something that you need to actually deliver on if you're going to do a marketing proposal. Future proofing is something that anyone who's proposing AI systems need to be able to answer, etc. Questions to ask. These are valid questions. These are questions I've literally heard in these kinds of meetings. So it's good questions. Likely counterpoints. Yep, this sounds too expensive. I've definitely heard that. We're stretched thin. How will we implement it? I've heard that. These are plausible. In other words, the meta prompt and the ensuing clarity that I provided when it asked for specific clarity have given this model the ability to be useful to me. I would say just this slight change with the meta prompt has pushed this meeting prep to, I want to say 80% good. It still needs probably another iteration, but we now have something usable. Whereas with the earlier version, without the meta prompt, I couldn't make heads or tails of it because it chose to make up so much stuff. And that's really the key. This is a speedboat you can't slow down. And so you have to figure out how to take advantage of that power. And I'm trying to give you a meta prompt that enables you to take the work out of steering so that you can write the way you write and still get value back. So I hope you enjoyed that dive. We're not done yet. I want to actually get into some of the principles that makes GPT-5 different to prompt that I've discovered as I've started to craft these meta prompts. And by the way, there are a lot of meta prompts in the Substack. That's just an example for a quick 5-minute get started. I love that. That's right at the top of the article. But there's a bunch of others that are for specific departments and use cases, because what I found is meta prompting is something that you can exercise at different levels. You can have the quick 5-minute get started version. And then for people who want to go in depth, let's say you want to craft a customer service prompt, you can actually have a much longer meta prompt that's much more detailed, that makes you do a little more work. And you're going to have a much more powerful experience for that particular objective. I want to cover both, get started quick and also the detail. These are the prompting principles that have really popped out to me about why GPT-5 is different and how we can leverage that difference for prompting. Number 1, GPT-5 is multiple models. We know that, but the dispatcher and routing reality popped out to me a lot. I'm going to talk about that a fair bit when I talk about sort of the way we leverage the principles of prompting to prompt effectively. Number 2 is the precision tax. If you give the model contradictory instructions, it's going to make the model burn out really hard. You're basically telling a really powerful speedboat to go in 2 directions at once. That burns tokens, it burns cost, it burns time, it's painful. And then the third thing that sort of shapes how GPT-5 responds is agentic versus conversational. GPT-5, I've told you it's a speedboat. It desperately wants to complete missions, right? It doesn't want to have conversations. It wants to go do something. And so part of my goal with this meta prompting is to recognize this reality and to help you get to a spot where it's actually doing something useful and not just like burning tokens going off where you don't want it to go. And then the expertise paradox is the last one that I want to call out. this model works best with expert instructions. It does not work with the casual prompting we've talked about. I hope you've seen that in this example. It just doesn't work well at all. And it's marketed to non-experts. And I think that one of the things that Sam Altman and others have realized is that they kind of screwed that up. Like, they needed to be more honest about what this model takes to prompt well and how hard it is. I read the GPT-5 official prompting guide, which, by the way, it's notable to me that they felt the need to release that, because it suggests that they recognize that this is also difficult to prompt. Let me close with some prompting principles that you can apply in other cases, because I don't want you to just leave with like one prompt here. I want you to leave with a deeper understanding of what's going on. And so I'm going to walk through, based on those insights, right, that it's a router, that it forces you to be precise, that it's agentic, that it makes you like write expert prompts. What does that mean from a prompting principle perspective? You won't find these in the GPT-5 prompting guide. I had to infer these and dig into these. That's why it's taken a while to make this video. This has been on my list for a bit, and I've really had to dig in to make sure I feel like I understand how to prompt this model well and can share it with you effectively. So you need to recognize the importance of structure when you're prompting GPT-5. That's the first thing. Structure will affect the way the model routes. So if it's a bunch of models in a trench coat and it's routing, you want to make sure that you have your structure put together in a way that prompts the router early on to go to the model you want. And so some of the early tries at this were like, hey, think hard to trigger the thinking model. But really, you want to think about it as, what are your headers? What are your bullets? How do you expect the model to respond in terms of the structure of the output? Those are all things that affect the implicit routing of the model and which GPT-5 under the hood it calls. And I will say, I don't want to denigrate the idea of just writing think hard. That absolutely works too. But keep in mind that the way you structure the prompt and the detail with which you sort of structure the prompt shapes what the model calls. And in general, the more specific your structure is, the more you're able to clarify to GPT-5 what the core problem is that it's solving. That's a lot of what a meta prompt does, is it starts to elucidate or lay out for ChatGPT-5 what the core problem is. And that in turn helps the model make the correct decision about where to route it. So that's why the structure matters. Number two, we talked about this whole idea of contradictions burning tokens. You want to make sure that you explicitly prioritize tension. If there are multiple goals, if there are multiple tasks, if you tell ChatGPT-5, be comprehensive but be brief, you're basically making it burn the motor. You want to be really explicit and say, my primary goal is X, my secondary goal is Y. When in doubt, prioritize 1 over 2. This is Y. Again, meta prompts can help with that so that you don't have to put in quite as much work yourself. But without those, the model is going to take everything seriously and literally and try and resolve the contradiction and burn a lot of tokens doing it, and it probably won't get you where you want. The third principle is that depth is not equal to length with these model responses. The model differentiates what it calls reasoning and what it calls verbosity, or the length of the response. It is possible to get a PhD level analysis in a very tight executive summary format. That means when you're prompting, you want to specify how hard the model should think and how verbal it should be. Now, I'm aware that you can do this more directly in the Responses API, but if you're just a chatbot user, you can also talk to the model directly in plain English in your prompt and tell it how hard you want it to reason. Tell it how long you want the response to be. And that's a useful guide for the model. It helps. It shapes what the model does. So keep in mind, you don't have one power level. You have multiple power levels to play with here. You have a depth power lever that goes like this, and it can go in depth or not. And you have a length of response. And so you can say, I want really in-depth thinking and I want a short response, or vice versa. Fourth principle, you have to define the uncertainty here. As I've said before, this model is literal. You need to recognize that because it's kind of a speedboat, it's going to attempt even any task you give it, even when it shouldn't attempt that task. It needs explicit protocols. There are not explicit fallbacks for when it gets stuck. It needs you to tell it when you're stuck, or when you don't know what to do, or when there's ambiguity, or when there's uncertainty, here is where you go. This is the next step. If data is insufficient, this is what you need to specify. This is what you need to ask. There's a lot of examples like that where we know there's ambiguity, but we need to specify for the model, this is what you do. And By the way, there's 7 of these. I've gone through 4. If this is feeling like a lot, that's okay. That's why I wrote the meta prompts. I want to make this easier. And that's why I've taken the time to craft these prompts, because I think that we need help steering this model. And this is the first model that really feels like it's so powerful and so sensitive to steering that we need something like meta prompts just to drive it effectively. Principle number 5, tool use is sort of part of the initial assessment the model makes. And my observation is that it's not really easy to get the model to be balanced in its tool use. It's either a tool maximalist or a tool minimalist. It helps if you have opinions about tool use to tell it. So say, first, I want you to search the web. Then after that, please analyze the data that you retrieve in this way. Give it that specific tool use instruction so you don't leave it to guess. Number 6, context memory can be an illusion with this model. It will act like it remembers. It will. But it's rereading everything each time, just like every other model. And you will need to periodically reiterate instructions to remind it to follow the protocols you're giving it. In other words, this model is extraordinarily steerable, but it's kind of built for 1 or 2 turn conversations at core where you have a very detailed prompt. If you have a lengthy conversation that's meandering and eventually get to the point, the model may not remember at the level of detail you need it to across that entire conversational set because it's cued so deeply to the last thing you said and whether it's specific and actionable, and it can go do it. It's that bias for action that's coming in again. One of the ways you can check and see if the model remembers is to plant a flag in your initial prompt. You can say, if you have read this instruction and recall it and remember it, please write flag at the end of every response. When the word flag disappears in the responses, you know that the model has forgotten the initial instruction. You can actually see right when it happens. So there's ways to know, but I think the larger point here is that this model expects you to prompt well at the top, and that's why I've invested in meta prompting as a useful way to take our, somewhat messy and scattered human thinking and actually get it into shape for a prompt. Principle number 7, structure beats intelligence. And so give the model methodologies. Don't assume that thinking mode is the only thing you have to work with here. If you give it structured thinking and structured prompting, if you give it methodologies along with goals, you're going to get much farther. And so in a sense, I think all of the conversation that happened at ChatGPT-5 launch around can we push the model into thinking mode or not was a little bit of a red herring. Yes, there are ways to do it. I've talked about some of those, like writing think hard, like the way you talk about the problem and elucidate it clearly so it's easy to see. But at the end of the day, if you give it clear goals and methodologies and clear structure, you get so far with this model that I find in practice, I care less about exactly which model it called because it's more likely to be calling the correct one in the first place. It's more likely that if it calls a model, the model's going to know what to do. And for both of those reasons, I find that good structure on the prompting makes some of the intelligence questions go away. So if you're wondering, how do I make this all work? How do I put this together? How do I take these principles and use them? You want to make sure that you are calling for the expertise you need. I'm actually going to go through the components of a prompt that I would recommend, and this will come out in the meta prompting as well if you want to dive deeper. I recommend that you define the role not because of role play, not because it necessarily is a magic card, but because you're trying to prompt for expertise routing. You're trying to push the model to understand where it needs to have expertise in order to set up the rest of the prompt. And so in the beginning, in 2022, when we said define a role, the thought was this enables the model to actually answer correctly, and otherwise it wouldn't. Now it's more about aiming. This enables the model to recognize the world it's in, the expertise that's called, and maybe route to a smarter model if need be. Number 2, make sure you have an objective framework. If you're writing a prompt from scratch, you'll have to do this yourself. If you're using a meta prompt, it will help you a bit. But you want to be clear about what the goal is for the model, because again, ChatGPT-5 needs to go on missions. So you have to give it missions if you're going to do the work with it. Number 3, process methodology. You want to give it really explicit process to go through. Meta prompts can help here too. You want to make sure that the model understands this step by step is what we need to do to get to the end result. Number 4, you want to have an explicit expectation for format. Make sure that the model knows how to get you the format that you want. What do you need? Meeting notes? Do you need an email? Fine, and what you're asking for. It wants to do the job. Make sure it knows how to do the job in a way that you want. Number 5, give it those boundaries and limitations. Constraint handling really matters with this model because you're trying to aim the speedboat. If you're telling it, don't go to the coral reefs, that's really helpful because it just wants to go fast. So tell it where not to go. And that matters a lot because if those initial prompts are really important to give the model a mission, you want to make sure the model understands these are the anti-missions, right? These are the anti-goals. These are the things we're not going to do. Number 6, be clear about those uncertainty pieces, right? I talked about how you have to define areas of tension and ambiguity and explicitly give the model priorities. Like this is number 1, this is number 2. If there's a conflict, this is how you resolve it. Take that seriously. Take it really seriously because it will help the model to help you. And finally, number 7, give it a way to check its work. The model wants to please you and go on missions. Give it a way to check its work. Give it validation criteria that will help. And those are the 7 components that I have seen work well with this model. And they all add up to that core idea we talked about at the beginning of this video. This model needs to be steered. The whole idea of meta prompting is it's basically giving you a helper rudder that you can use to more easily steer. It's like giving you power steering to steer this boat. Because if you don't know better, if you just try and drive this the way you drove other models, you're going to have the experience that so many people had after ChatGPT-5 launched. You're going to give it the same instructions you gave other models that worked, and you're going to realize how much power is there and how much bias for action is there and how much demand for precision there is, and get rightfully frustrated because the jump in prompting expectation is frankly ridiculous. I'm saying that. I think it's ridiculous. But that's the expectation, and that's why I'm building meta prompts to help, because I think that we need something like power steering for this. And so my suggestion to you is that you take the meta prompting, play with it, see if it will help you to get more precision, look at the 7 principles I've outlined, see if that can help you to write better prompts, and make sure that you recognize that there will be moments when you don't need to do all of this. You do not need to use meta prompts for simple factual queries. You don't need to use fancy prompts for an exploratory conversation where the whole goal is to discover meaning together. You don't need to use it for personal and emotional conversations. So understand that this model is built for the kinds of missions I've been describing over most of this video, and that therefore this meta prompting skill set, this meta prompting toolkit, the idea of prompting in a more specific manner is going to help it because that's the core of what the model wants to do. But that if you're kind of on the edges of what the model does, because to be honest, this model is not a super emotionally smart model. I feel like an emotional conversation is on the edge of what it does. This model isn't really built for factual queries. It can do it. If you're in that kind of a space, don't bother with the fancy prompting. Just go with the basic conversation. And frankly, there are other models that do some of that stuff better. Claude has better emotional capabilities than ChatGPT. We're just going to say it, right? And so you can pick the model that works for you for these other tasks. The era of casual conversation prompting is just over. With ChatGPT-5, we need to recognize that we are in a new world. I would expect ChatGPT-6 to be even more agentic, demand even more precision from you. And maybe they're going to ship something that helps you expand your prompts. We'll see. But at the end of the day, you need to learn systematic prompting now. And meta prompting is a way to learn that doesn't feel as overwhelming. It helps you to steer. Please, please, please recognize that you can prompt ChatGPT-5. It is not impossible. You can give it the precision it needs with some help. You can understand this model. This model is not impossibly complex. It's very, very useful if you can get it to steer predictably. And predictability is driven by prompting. And predictability beats the wildly unpredictable, brilliant, or dumb responses that you get from conversational prompting. We need to get to a point where our prompting is more precise. And so I hope that this video has helped you understand some of what makes ChatGPT-5 tricky to prompt, the principles that go into ChatGPT-5, and how those principles of prompting shape the model and how they shape the response. And also, I hope the meta prompt example helps you to see the importance of using meta prompts when you're tired, frustrated, don't have the time to improve your own prompting so you can get the most out of this model. That's ChatGPT-5 for you. It is a tricky, tricky model, but you got this. You got it.